What's up, guys? 1-3 yesterday. This awful run continues. This is not good. And I mean, I'm going to be honest with when I assess the plays after the fact. I'll say when I think the play was like completely wrong, the wrong play. I'm not sure that was the case with any of those last night. And if you recap these games, the Incarnate Word one, I mean, they were losing the whole game, but there were definitely points where they were within the number a couple different times, kind of just hovering right around the number. If you look at the stats in that game, the game statistically played close. The rebound battle was even. The turnover battle was even. And what happened, and Incarnate Word also had way more field goal attempts. They had 12 more field goal attempts, 8 more three-point attempts, but they had 12 fewer free throw attempts. So Southeast Louisiana had 22 free throws to Incarnate Word's 10, and Southeast Louisiana shot 52.2% from the field and 55% from three with 11 threes. So that's what did it, man. It was just a ridiculous field goal percentage discrepancy, 52.2 to 37.9%, and then 22 free throws to 10. That's pretty much what decided the game. The free throw discrepancy, I don't see the game, so I don't know if there was biased reffing going on, a lot of like home cooking in that one, but Incarnate Word had more field goal attempts. They had more offensive rebounds by a lot. So they had more, they just had more opportunities to score, and they still didn't cover the spread. So that one, I'm not sure that the final score really indicates what went on in that game. I would almost say the same with Idaho, Sacramento State, man. Even though Sacramento State got blown out on the scoreboard, at least. But that game wasn't statistically that far off either. Sacramento State out-rebounded Idaho by 9, 30-21. They had 13 offensive rebounds to Idaho's 2. Let's see. They had, they lost the turnover battle slightly. They had more field goal attempts, more three-point attempts, and more free throw attempts. So they statistically won the game, basically, yet they lost by 16, which makes no sense. They shot only 32.6 from the floor, whereas Idaho shot 53.7% from the floor. So despite having 5 fewer field goal attempts and 5 fewer free throw attempts, Idaho actually had more field goal makes and more free throw makes, which is absolutely ridiculous. Sacramento State outplayed them in most aspects of that game. They had more possessions, way more rebounds, more free throws, and they still lost the game, really just on shooting percentage. It's just awful, man. And in those games, I beat the closing number in both of them, too. Incarnate Word went off at 7, I think, and I had them at 8.5, so I beat the number there. Sacramento State went off 5.5, and I got them at 4, so I beat the closing numbers on those. Doesn't even matter. Still just total losses. And like I said, statistically, the stats were not indicative of what went on in those games. And then the NBA game was a crusher of spirits. The Atlanta Hawks, I mean, they were in that game the whole way. Should have covered. The game was really close. So when you have an underdog of more than a few points in a game like that, they're probably going to cover. They were winning the game outright in the fourth quarter. It was a bad spot for the Clippers, and the Atlanta Hawks wind up not covering by 1.5 points with the number. I got 3.5. The number actually, I think, went off 4, so I missed the best number there very slightly. It is kind of a key number in basketball. If it had landed 4, I would have been really pissed, and it almost did, although it landed 5. But even so, I think I got absolutely screwed on that one, too. The LA Clippers shot 58.4% from the floor and 60% from 3 and hit 21 three-pointers. So even though Atlanta had 6 more field goal attempts, 4 more three-point attempts, they did have 4 fewer free throw attempts. So, I mean, that's all pretty close to even, but Atlanta had a few more possessions, a few more shots than the Clippers did. And Atlanta also won the rebound battle, I believe, by a few. So Atlanta actually played slightly better than the Clippers did in that game, yet they wind up not covering as a home underdog, just barely. It's just brutal, man. It is so brutal. Everything about yesterday was brutal. But then the Kansas State Wildcats got there. Big upset win over Kansas. Not a big upset based on what the spread was, but I explained my reasons for playing that. And that one got a little bit dicey. At the beginning of the second half, Kansas State threw away what was a close game, and they let Kansas go on a 9-0 run, and all of a sudden they were down 11. But luckily they came back, and they wound up being able to put it away. It looked like they had to put away in regulation, but Kansas State was turning it over unbelievably in the late portions of that game. They had way too many turnovers. They were being completely reckless on offense. They turned it over way too much, and that almost cost them the game. And it did cost them the lead at the end of regulation, but luckily it wound up going, I guess luckily they didn't lose in regulation, although if they had, it still would have covered. But it went into overtime, and I'm thinking they're not even going to cover now, but they absolutely did, and they won outright. So thanks for that. Kansas State in that game did have the free throw discrepancy, I believe, but I'm not sure that the reffing was that biased in the game because I was watching it and they made some bad calls the other way too. Like there were some calls in crucial moments where like guys are like going for a rebound and Kansas player just like kind of dove to the floor and all of a sudden, that's a foul on Kansas State, even though there was very little contact. It's like, what are you talking about? So there were some weird calls. That particular one was a 1-and-1, though, and Kansas missed the front end of it, so it wound up not even mattering. But that was, at least that one got there, and I think it was the right side. So we move on to today, and today I'm going to be way more selective, even though NHL is back in swing. And yesterday, I should have mentioned on my video, I did like the New York Islanders to some extent, a lean to the Islanders yesterday, and I wish I played it because they won at Toronto, and that line actually crashed on Toronto as a favorite throughout the day. That was a situation where so the NHL's coming out of the All-Star break, and when you have a situation like this, it's kind of like buys in the NFL where you have teams that have been off for a while now. What you want to do is you want to tend to play on teams that didn't go into the break playing very well because they can use that break to like recalibrate and figure some things out. And you want to play generally against teams that went into the break hot because the break can just totally stop their momentum. And it's like, well, if everything's going well, then what do you change going into the break, right? You don't have anything to fix. So I'm not going to play any of the NHL today because I don't like the way the market looks, but what I just said is certainly the case for the Edmonton Oilers, but they're up from -130 to -140 as a road favorite at Vegas, which is crazy to see that Edmonton is a huge favorite on the road at Vegas. That almost might look a little bit suspicious, even though Edmonton is the hottest team in the NHL. Vegas has 68% of the tickets and only 60% of the cash, so I guess the public sentiment is still that Vegas is a very good team, which they are, but I guess the public is still thinking this is a bargain, getting Vegas as a home underdog here. So things look too suspicious about the market for me to get involved, even kind of in both directions in this one. But the public is on Vegas, and the cash discrepancy looks like it's going against them, at least for now. It's still early in the day, but just based on the situation, I would kind of lean against Edmonton, though, because Edmonton has like the longest win streak of the season, dude. They're on a 14-game win streak, I believe. That's what they're on, but then they went into the All-Star break, and I don't think that's going to be helpful to them. I think, if anything, the All-Star break will halt their momentum, and I believe their best player, McDavid, was one of the All-Star captains as well in the All-Star game there. I think he had his team was named after him or whatever. There was a team McDavid. I think that was his team. So I don't like that aspect of it either, where you have a team that's on a huge, huge win streak. I think the break will put a pause to their momentum there, and the fact that their best player was like one of the highlighted players in the All-Star game, I think that's also bad for Edmonton. So I don't like it at all. So I would lean to Vegas in that one. And Vegas did lose their final game going into the break, kind of ugly to Detroit. So I think if anything, Vegas is going to be the team that has more things to fix and kind of turn around because they lost some games going into the break, some of the recent games. They only went in on a 1-game loss streak. But even so, Edmonton was the hottest team in the country, and I think that the All-Star break is not going to help that. So that's the way I look there. And I do also lean to the New Jersey Devils, but the market looks like it's against that too. They're down from -110 to -106. They're favored at home against the Colorado Avalanche. The market's kind of telling you the Avalanche are only the slightly better team there. Even though I think the perception is going to be that they're the way better team, which the line is telling you is not really the case. But the line is also factoring in what the situation is here. But the situation is definitely negative for Colorado. I just can't quite get there because New Jersey has 93% of the tickets on them, but only 80% of the cash. So somehow they kind of look like the public team, and the cash discrepancy is going against them, which I don't like that. But Colorado played last night. So there were only 2 games last night. It was Islanders at Toronto and Colorado at the Rangers. And that's a big game, dude. So Colorado at Rangers, that was the first game for Colorado after the All-Star break. They lost a tough game, 2-1 to a really good team in the Rangers. That's a tough game, man. Now they're on a back-to-back, whereas the Devils are, of course, coming out of the All-Star break. So they haven't played yet since the All-Star break, and they went into the All-Star break ugly on a 2-game loss streak. And they'd not been playing well really at all going into the All-Star break. So I think if anything, that's going to be helpful to New Jersey coming out of the All-Star break. That might help them fix some things, whereas Colorado has already played a game now. But then you might say that maybe that's even a little bit of a positive in a way for Colorado, because now they're not coming into this game cold, at least, and they do have 1 game under their belt, and maybe the back-to-back aspect of it is being overvalued a little bit with New Jersey being favored in this line. I don't know. I think it's more of a negative, though, just because it was a really tough game that Colorado had to play last night, and they have no time off between that game and tonight's game. And it's like, how focused are you really going to be on New Jersey? I don't know, because I think Colorado has a bigger game up next as well, if I recall. Well, it's against Carolina and then Florida. So, yeah, kind of. They're facing better teams in New Jersey coming up after New Jersey. So it is possible that there's almost like a sandwich aspect to this spot, too. And I think New Jersey might be in a positive coming out of the break because they went into the break on a negative note. So those are my leans in hockey, but I'm not going to do it with either of them. I tend to just start ramping up the hockey after we get a couple games back into it after the All-Star break. A lot of times I won't play in the first couple of games back from the All-Star break just because the situational aspects of the games are kind of less strong. So we'll see about that. But if the market agreed with me on one of those, I might be on those games. On the NBA, I'm actually not playing anything either, even though the NBA does have a decent lineup of games here. I don't like what I'm seeing here, and the Phoenix Suns, I think, might be in the worst spot on the board, but I still can't get there with that one either. The Suns are up from 3 to 3.5, though, and they have 51% of the cash on them, but 83% of the tickets on the other side on the Milwaukee Bucks. So the public sentiment is that the Milwaukee Bucks are going to bounce back, and there are some aspects of that I would tend to agree with. I would agree with the public on this one. I think the Phoenix Suns are in a bad spot, dude. They're returning from a long road trip with only 1 day off. They just had a 7-game road trip that took them down to Florida and to the East Coast at the longest, but it was a long road trip duration-wise. They haven't been back home since January 22nd. Now they come back home with only 1 day off, and of course, it's always a distracted spot when you return back home. These are adults. They have families. You have to get your family affairs back in order, and you don't have that much time to focus on basketball when you first come back. However, because it is the Milwaukee Bucks, I do think that that's going to mitigate the distraction angle to some extent. I like it better when it's a team that the returning home team is not going to really be focused on, but they're going to be focused on the Milwaukee Bucks, dude. I mean, the Bucks they're one of the best teams in the NBA, so I don't think Phoenix is going to overlook the Bucks here. And the Bucks, I do think the spot is a little bit better for the Bucks. So I do actually disagree with what I'm seeing in the market here, where it looks like it's a pros versus Joes situation, with the Joes thinking that they're getting value with the Bucks as an underdog because the Bucks are quite a good team, and thinking that the Bucks will bounce back, as opposed to the Phoenix Suns. But it looks like the more of the professional money is coming in on the Phoenix Suns right now. It looks like it's in very strong disagreement with the public there. So this is why I don't want to play against the Suns here, just because I don't want to buck what I'm seeing in the market there. Buck, get it? But I do think that the Bucks, I do think there is some truth to the fact that people expect the Bucks to bounce back after that really ugly game at Utah, which I played on Utah in that one. And Utah had to make a huge comeback and have a really good like fourth quarter to do what they did in that game, but they did do that, and they wound up winning by 15. So even though the Bucks were winning for a lot of that game, even by double digits earlier in the game, it winds up being an ugly looking result for the Bucks. So I do think the Bucks might be able to bounce back from that. That was a bad spot for them. It was a back-to-back, although you could argue this is also still a bad spot because now this is their fifth straight road game. They are still playing a third game in 4 days, although prior to the Dallas game, they had a couple days off. So yeah, it isn't the best rest spot for the Bucks. That is true. So neither team is in a good enough spot where I want to actually get involved in this one, unfortunately, because normally when I see, the Suns are coming back from a huge road trip here, I'd want to immediately look to go against them. But in this spot, there's hesitation there because I do think that the Bucks are also kind of in a bad spot there. They're both kind of in go against spots there, and because I think that the Suns won't totally be unfocused when it is the Bucks coming in. My one play today, I'm getting a little scared to play some games here, is going to be over in the college basketball. I mean, college basketball, there are a couple other ways that I'm looking that I can't quite get there with. I would want to fade North Carolina because they're, of course, coming off the monster win against Duke. I mean, that's a major rivalry game. That's a huge win. That was a game between top 10 ranked teams, even though I think Duke is a little bit overrated and probably not actually a top 10 team. That's still a monster win for North Carolina. So they are in a letdown spot, and they're down from 8.5 to 7. The problem is that I think Clemson is also a little bit overvalued, a little bit overrated, so I can't quite get there with it, even though, yes, I think North Carolina is in a bad spot. They're in the letdown spot. They don't really have a huge game up next. I mean, it's against Miami, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Did Miami knock them out of the tournament or anything last year? I'm not sure. No, they did not face each other in the ACC tournament. I mean, they did not face each other in the ACC tournament last year. So I don't know if Miami's that big a look ahead because Miami's not playing that well this year, but it is a letdown spot for sure. Coming off of that huge Duke game, I wouldn't expect North Carolina to be at their fullest attention here. Full attention. That doesn't sound quite good. They're fully erect right now. No, I would not expect them to be fully focused in this game, at least. And Clemson has really been struggling recently and lost their previous game to Virginia, which Virginia is actually playing really well in the conference, though. So that's actually kind of a tough loss for Clemson. So maybe it's not the best spot for Clemson either, because Clemson actually had to put together a big comeback in that game and played pretty close against Virginia. But Clemson was a favorite in that game. I think that was at home, and they wound up losing. So on the other hand, it's kind of an ugly loss in a way for Clemson as well. So I do lean to Clemson, but the power ratings like KenPom and stuff have this number like a few points higher than where it sits at the 7. So I don't think you're taking the best of it there with, well, you're not, because it opened at 8.5. But the fact that it went down tells me that I think some of the professional guys do agree on the Clemson side, but I think that it's kind of in conflict with where the number is. And I do weigh situations over kind of where the numbers guys are going to put the number here. But because I think Clemson, people think that they're kind of a little bit better than they actually are. They're kind of a dicey team, and it's getting into dicey territory for them to even make the tournament at this point. Although I think they'll still make it. But then again, that makes them maybe that gives them more motivation here to have to play a really good game to try to get a really what do you call it? Like they want like a huge win, a signature win, really. So this would be one if they were able to beat North Carolina. So that might focus Clemson a little bit more as well. So overall, all in all, I do agree with the situation more than I agree with the numbers, guys, because these are humans. They're not a math equation, really. So, but the number that the power ratings guys have, like KenPom, is far enough off from where this number is on North Carolina, having North Carolina favored by significantly more than the 7, that I can't quite get there with it. But I lean to Clemson in that one. What else? There was one other. Well, I mean, I lean against St. Mary's because they just beat Gonzaga. That was a huge win for St. Mary's. I think that might have completed the season sweep of Gonzaga for St. Mary's. I'm not even sure, but obviously that's a big win when you basically like sort of dethrone the team that's dominated this conference for so long. But they're laying 21.5 on the road at Pacific, up from 20.5. It's a weird place to play for Pacific, but I just don't want to get involved in a game where St. Mary's is so much better than Pacific that they could potentially dictate the score there if they wanted to. So I can't quite get there with that one either. And I don't love the spot for Kentucky either, coming off a tough game against Tennessee that they lost. It's not the best spot for them either, but they're down from 10 to 8.5 at Vandy. And the 8.5, you're not taking the best of it if you're taking 8.5 with Vandy. Vandy is really bad, even though their place is a tough place to play, and it is a bad spot for Kentucky. So I do lean to the Vandy side there, but I think you're not getting the best of the number there, even though Kentucky continues to be overvalued, I would have to say, in the market. I still think that Vanderbilt is so bad that this number may be a little bit low as well. So I can't quite get involved in that. I would not play Kentucky either, though, of course. I would only lean to the Vandy side there. And then Iowa State, Texas is just kind of an interesting game. Texas sitting at 2. I don't really see any market read on this yet. No market movement and no percentages yet. But Texas just went into TCU and beat them. And that's a big win for Texas, man. Texas is now back fully on the tournament radar again. It looks like the way that they're playing, I was saying they're probably not going to make the tournament, but now after the way that they played the last couple of games, I'm saying they probably are. That was a big win at TCU for that reason, but Iowa State's coming off a really brutal loss against Baylor, man. So both of these teams are in spots where I'd want to go against them, but I would lean to Texas just slightly because the way Iowa State lost to Baylor is so brutal. They put up a 3, basically at the buzzer that went in, and it would have won the game, but it was reviewed and determined that the ball did not leave the shooter's hands in time, which was correct. I did not. But I actually kind of question when the clock started on the play and if it started too early or not, which meant that if it started too early, then it would have expired too early as well. So I'm not sure about that, but Iowa State lost in that way, which is brutal. They would have won the game if that shot got off in time, that ridiculous 3 from almost half court that I think went off the backboard and in. So that's a really brutal way for Iowa State to lose. So I think they're in the worst spot than Texas is, coming out of a big win over TCU. This is still a big game for Texas when you have a ranked team coming into your house, but Iowa State does have the better defense. And I think Ken Baum has Iowa State as the better team, of course, which this line is telling you they are, but I think he has this line close to where it is here, the 2. I think he might have it at Texas 1 or something like that. So I'm not going to get involved in this one because I think both teams have aspects of their situation where I'd want to fade both of them. But the way Iowa State lost to Baylor is just brutal, dude. They were so close to winning that game. That was a big battle between both of those teams. But what I am going to do is go against, the only play that I have today is going to be to go against Baylor, the other side of that game. Baylor's sitting at 6, but it looks like it's ticked down to 6 with reduced juice. I was able to take Texas Tech +6 here. It looks like it's 5.5 at most places, but really not that much of a difference between 5.5 and 6. 6, only a slightly key number because it's 2 3-pointers, I guess, or 3 2-pointers. But Baylor, like I said, they're coming off that big game where they battled to the wire against Iowa State. Their coach, Drew, actually got ejected from the game. So it was a very emotional, tough game there. And Baylor was able to finish the game off without him, get the win. That last shot for Iowa State didn't count. Very dramatic win over a ranked team at home for Baylor. Big win. And who do they have up next after they play Texas Tech, who's, yeah, they're in the rankings, but barely, and they're ranked behind Baylor. Baylor has Kansas up next, which is a much bigger game than this two. Kansas, even though they lost last night to K-State, Kansas beat Houston before that. Kansas, of course, one of the top-ranked teams in the country, at least. So that's a bigger game than this one. So I think this is kind of a sandwich spot, dude. Baylor put in a max effort against Iowa State. That was a really tough game. Like I said, emotional. Their coach got thrown out of the game, and they have Kansas up next. That could be a look ahead. That's a big game. I don't know if you're really going to overlook a pretty good team like Texas Tech, but if you are, I think it's going to be when it's sandwiched in between Iowa State and Kansas here. Even though Texas Tech is actually ahead of Kansas in the Big 12 standings right now. It doesn't really seem that way, but Texas Tech is also on a 2-game loss streak, man, and they lost to Cincinnati in their last game, and that's an ugly loss, but they came into that off of playing 4 straight ranked teams. So that was a game where I mentioned I leaned to Cincinnati in that one to cover because Texas Tech had played against Houston, and then they beat BYU, went on the road, beat Oklahoma, who was ranked 11 at the time. Then they had a second straight road game, and I believe lost to TCU. I keep thinking that was an overtime game, but it wasn't. But it was a tough, close game. So coming off that slew of big games, they then faced an unranked Cincinnati team with this Baylor game on deck. So that was a bad spot for Texas Tech, dude. And now they're in a bounce back spot. They looked about as ugly as you could, losing at home as a favorite to Cincinnati. Texas Tech, they've lost 2 in a row now after that. I think they're going to be in a bit of an angry mood, and I think they're going to be focused here on Baylor. I like Texas Tech in this spot, so that's going to be my only play today. I think they're in a positive spot to bounce back, whereas I think Baylor is in pretty much a sandwich spot here. Ken Baum has this number lower. He has it right at where I guess the number is here, right around 6, I guess. But Texas Tech, not really a terrible team here. Both of these teams actually play better offensively than defensively. Both teams have good offenses and pretty suspect defenses, so it's kind of a similar style actually in both of these cases. And both of these teams, despite being offensive teams, actually play slower tempos too. So that's also interesting that this game, even though it's at Baylor, that means it'll probably play to a style that Texas Tech is familiar with. So in a game where I like the situational aspect of it for Texas Tech, I think it'll be a positive for Texas Tech. So that's the only play I have today, man. Texas Tech +6 in college basketball. Have a good one. Peace.